Well, they say that an effective presidency, pretty much everything that's going to get done gets done in the first 100 days. But with the case of Donald Trump, it may get done in the first negative 70 days. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And as we record this, it's about T-minus 70 days in round numbers until Donald Trump is actually inaugurated and can begin his program of deporting people, fixing the economy, basically getting rid of all sorts of weird societal perversions that have become the norm. And guys, 70 days before he actually begins his program, it seems like all of these things are in full bloom and marching at accelerated speed here. Scott's episode this week is about the 4B movement and basically talking about how Donald Trump is already in the process of reducing future abortions because so many liberal women have decided they're going to abstain from sex for the next 4 years. What we find is that he's appointed a border czar who strikes me as a guy. Honestly, I heard Tom Homan talking about these mass deportation guys, and I thought, you don't even need to have him do anything other than just stand at the border. This guy's face, just put his head on a pike or something, and it's like he's not messing around. So already we hear stories about the mayor of New York City is busing large numbers of immigrants back to Texas. They've apparently cut off this business of giving them debit cards on the public dime so that they can, New York is essentially saying, well, I guess we'd better start the evacuation now because it's a coming. Steve, it's really astonishing how quickly society is moving into a Trump second term, and it makes you wonder if all of the things that you hoped would happen during the Trump administration are actually possible. So let me just ask you, basically a two-part question. What are the three things that you wanted to see most from Trump winning an election? And do you think there's a chance of them happening? Because I'm looking around thinking chances are pretty good they may have happened already.
Wow, that's a great point. It's sure looking that way. I mean, this is a giddy period, so I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. But yeah, the signs are good. You left one out. Trump is named Kristi Noem as his DHS secretary, and while he didn't say this, maybe he should have. She shot her own dog. Imagine what she'll do at the border.
See, this is what I love about this country.
Right?
It's like don't even think about it. The person who's going to be guarding the border, she shot her own dog. We're not messing around. But in all seriousness, the appointments, Steve, seem to be indicating that he's not messing around, that he's serious about this.
He is. Marco Rubio is going to be a Secretary of State.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, that just came out this morning. And the headline I saw for this, I love this. It was, he's going to be, what was the combination? Pro-Israel, pro-India, anti-China.
Pro-India, that pro-India is the most important thing that nobody realizes how important it is.
Nobody realizes this. We do, and our viewers do, because we're all a cut above here in information and intellect. But we got to share this with the broader public. So click that share button. So we've got Marco Rubio coming in at state. Trump himself has apparently made, and this was as of yesterday. The information may be old now. He talked to something like 70 world leaders in the few days after the election. One of them was Vladimir Putin, and Trump apparently did a little bit of muscle flexing on this call. It took place on Thursday. It lasted about 20 minutes, according to people in the know in the Trump camp. And Trump reminded Putin that Washington has a sizable military presence in Europe, and why don't we start getting serious about peace in Ukraine? Negotiating peace from a position of strength, who'd have thought it? Right?
Madness.
So, Bill, in terms of foreign policy, this is shaping up to be everything I could have wanted. And foreign policy, of course, is the one place where the president has the most control. Domestic policy, he's got to deal with the bureaucracy that'll dig in their heels. He's got to deal with Congress. They have their constitutional role to play. So that's where it gets complicated. But DHS is looking good. Ideally, I would abolish DHS, but not until we get the border taken care of. DHS was a huge mistake. Damn you, George W. Bush. So it looks like we're going to get the border thing fixed. It looks like we're taking a two-pronged approach to the illegal problem. The one prong being getting serious about actually controlling the border, and the other, deportation. I doubt we can deport them all, but by disincentivizing being here, you're going to get a lot of self-deportations, and that's the phrase that the Democrats mocked Mitt Romney for in 2012, because that guy was too inarticulate to express what he meant by it. I am here to correct that. You disincentivize, and people start to go home where they can actually get a paycheck and, not be on the American dole. So we've got those two things going for us, which would have been 2 out of the 3. The third one, Bill, I would love to see this happen before the swearing in like the other 2, but it just doesn't work that way, unfortunately. And that is going to be gutting the bureaucracy, particularly the Department of Justice. That's going to have to wait until he's in office.
It'd be nice to have a Justice Department again.
It really would be. And some of that actually could take place before the inaugural, now that I think about it. I just mentioned self-deportation. There might be some self-cleaning house at DOJ where some of these guys who have been on this lawfare against conservative Republicans and Donald Trump himself have already maybe started to update their LinkedIn profiles and are looking for the exits. So that could happen before the inaugural. If it does, great. If not, his DOJ pick might be, and we don't know who it is yet.
It'll be the most important one.
Yeah, that could be very much so the most important one. Obama got praised by the press for having Eric Holder as his wingman, and which is, it's not supposed to be that way. Biden got praised for having what's-his-name as his wingman at head of DOJ. Donald Trump is going to need a wingman at DOJ, and the press is going to howl and scream, and so will the Democrats, but I repeat myself, but that place has got to be burned down, cleaned up, and rebuilt.
Well, Scott, talking about howling and screaming, Mr. Homan does not appear to be a wallflower when it comes to his Donald Trump's promise about the largest mass deportation in history. He said, well, doesn't this mean that you're going to be separating families by deporting certain illegals and leaving others? And he said, if you don't want your family separated, then we can deport the whole family. Even I went, wow, whoa. This guy's not messing around. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was trying to pin him down on this, but your policy is going to separate families. And he basically said, listen, if I'm coming home from a football game and I'm driving drunk and I get arrested and I've got my kids in the car, they're going to separate my family right away. I'm going to jail and the kid's going to home or child protective services. So I'm not buying into this entire argument. I guess what I'm asking, Scott, is were there any particular hopes that you had for a Trump administration? And do you, like many of us, see signs that this isn't just campaign rhetoric, that there's some actual teeth behind this campaign promises that he made?
I think he's learned lessons from his first administration. And one of the things that he seems to be doing this time is appointing people who he believes or knows that he can trust to start out with. I think he may have been a little overwhelmed the first time around, and there were people making all kinds of recommendations of who he should appoint. But already in these early picks, we're seeing it's kind of New York and Florida heavy. These are 2 states that he knows well and people he knows well from those places. So getting Elise Stefanik, getting Marco Rubio and people like that. And he knows Kristi Noem fairly well. He knows Tom Homan, who served in his administration previously. So I'm sorry, Tom, I forget his first name. His last name is Homan. Anyway, what I loved about Homan, I saw an interview with him, and he said, look, we already have a bunch of people in this country who went to court with appeals for asylum. They were found to not be legitimate appeals for asylum. And then our process dictates that you go back to your country of origin. They did not. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to send people who are already under deportation orders, who didn't leave the country, and we're going to deport them. He said, if we don't deport them, what the hell are we doing? Why are we going through the charade of saying, there are legitimate asylum claims and there are illegitimate asylum claims. If yours is illegitimate, you go home. And we didn't send them home. So anyway, that's not my number one issue, but I was glad to see him dealing with that with integrity. So I would, number one for me, I would love to see a muscular foreign policy that makes tyrants afraid of us, it makes the Arab world realize that they've got to do a little more than pay lip service to. It's funny. the way Saudi Arabia, they just had a big conference in Saudi Arabia, and they issued this statement where they basically, badmouthed Israel. However, Saudi Arabia, behind the scenes, have actually been helping Israel in various ways, including making their ports available to unload goods that would eventually wind up in Israel. So Saudi Arabia is in this weird position where they feel like they have to curry favor with the Muslim world. And they also understand that without the United States and Israel, that area of the world would be a worse hellhole than it already is. But just the fact that that world leaders are not going to have confidence, as they have for the last 4 years, about what the U.S. president might do will be helpful to us, because they don't know what Donald Trump is going to do. And so that kind of disruptive behavior, as H.R. McMaster pointed out in his recent book about his time at the White House, I think is valuable to us. Number two, constitutionalist judges on the federal bench. And that's not just, we always think about the Supreme Court, but there are many federal bench positions that get filled over the course of a presidential term. He has already had more than his share of time at that trough and made more appointments than a lot of presidents get a chance to do. But I would like to see more constitutionalist judges. And then, even though we're well on our way to this already, I don't think people fully appreciate the power of energy independence. And the ability for us to not have to worry about areas of the world because it might cut off our arterial flow of energy. So if we're able to provide for ourselves, then we can act with better integrity on the international stage without having to kowtow to bad guys because we're terrified that they may be able to affect our economy in a drastic way. So I think all of these things are good. And then I'll throw in a final fourth, which is rapid disassembly of the Department of Education.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, these guys have covered so much ground, there's hardly anything left for me to really talk about. I do find it interesting that once Pennsylvania was, the day after the election, when it was clear that Donald Trump had actually won, the stock markets just leapt. What does that tell you? That tells you, and within the course of a day or two of his election, you find out little things like Toyota has basically dropped their electronic car mandate and all of these other things that they were doing because of political pressures from left-wing governments like ours had caused them to make business decisions that weren't really in any way in their interest in a business sense. So, yes, the as far as the border is concerned, when you've got a guy who says, well, the way to avoid having family separation is to deport the whole family, that's got a ring of a guy who's not messing around. And I've seen him talking, and he doesn't look like he's messing around at all. I just had this thought, folks. There are so many things that are assumed to be impossible in American politics. It's like you simply can't do that. It's impossible. You can't do the mass deportations. You can't control the border. You can't lower inflation. You can't. It's impossible. But the one example that keeps coming back to me the most is what Rudy Giuliani did to New York City, which was the most liberal city in America. It had the highest murder rate in the country. It was #1 murder capital in the world. They told Rudy Giuliani that he could not get crime under control. They told him that they couldn't do anything about the graffiti on the trains, that most of the trains had broken doors, and that was just the price of doing business. And he simply said, no, you will fix this. You will clean them up. If there's broken windows, then we will enforce the law. And for 20 years, New York City coasted on the fact that all you have to do is not buy into the it's impossible narrative, and then miraculous things happen. I think that Donald Trump is going to make an immediate commitment to reduce regulations, and by reducing regulations, he frees businesses up to take some of whatever capital that they've amassed in order to firewall themselves against whatever insanity might be coming their way. And can use that to lower prices. Obviously, when you've got a Secretary of State who understands the importance of India, which is the most populous country in the world, borders on China, if it had not been for the Himalaya Mountains, ladies and gentlemen, the wars that had ravaged Europe and turned it into a bloodbath would be a footnote in history compared to the clash of these two civilizations of China and India. And having India on our side as a counterweight to China scares the living daylights out of the Chinese. They're not going to be messing around with Taiwan if they're looking over their back shoulder. All of these appointments are showing a great deal of strategic vision and wisdom. And I guess that's the point that I wanted to close on, is that I think Donald Trump can achieve things like a much more robust economy with lower prices, a foreign policy where we are respected and the rule of law dominates in the world, and a secure border that is run by Americans. And my fourth one is a Justice Department that is actually interested in pursuing justice rather than making sure that justice becomes a box that you can either tick or not tick depending on who the offender's political party is. But I think the thing that's most remarkable about Donald Trump and what he's showing with these appointments is Donald Trump is not a politician. He does not look at political problems in a political way. He is a deal maker. And the genius about having a deal maker as a president is a deal maker can look at an adversary or at two different adversaries acting as a third party and say, how do I find a way to structure reality, given the limits of my power, so that both sides win? There's only one way to, as a specific example of what I'm talking about, there's only one way to end the Ukraine war in a very short period of time, and that is if Donald Trump, as a deal maker, can find a way for Vladimir Putin and for Zelensky to both go home to their people and say, we won. If he can come up with a structure where both leaders can go home and say, we won, then that war will be over. And I am astonished at how many things that looked like concrete anti-tank obstacles, indestructible obstacles to achieving a better America, have already, 70 days before he's even sworn in, begin to crack and crumble before our very eyes, which tells me that they were never that powerful or that strong in the first place, that all of the harm that we've done to this country has been self-inflicted, that we are Gulliver who's basically nailed himself to the beach, and once we stop hobbling ourselves, we can get up and walk like a giant again and not only make our country great again, but make the world a happier, safer, and more prosperous place. I believe that's not only possible, I'm at the point where I don't even think it's likely anymore. Now I'm beginning to think it's inevitable. And these are exciting times, and I'm just very happy to be a part of it. And we're very grateful for all of our members at BillWhittle.com who also are a part of it and keep shows like Right Angle and Hot Mic and all the rest of it coming. So for Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. Keep your eyes open. It's going to be interesting and I suspect glorious. We're all going to have to wear shades, and we'll see you next time here on Right Angle.